At 5:47 a.m. on the morning we were supposed to travel to Paris, my suitcase was already packed. Then my phone buzzed. "Dad, don't come to the airport," my son texted. "My wife says this trip is for real family only. You'll ruin the family photos." I was about to call him back immediately when a sudden thought stopped me cold. And when I discovered what they had been secretly planning behind my back, the color drained from my face. If you made it here, I am genuinely grateful you stayed. Drop a comment and tell me what city, what country are you listening from. I love knowing who is in this room with me. A quick note. This story weaves fictional elements into its bones for storytelling and educational purposes. Names and places are coincidental, but everything it is trying to say to you is worth hearing. My body woke up before my mind did. That happens when you spend 40 years running a company. Your internal alarm clock never fully retires, even when you do. It was 5:47 in the morning on September 8th, 2025, and I was already standing in my kitchen in Charleston before the coffee maker finished its first gurgle, still half convinced I was late for a board meeting that stopped existing 3 years ago. The house was quiet, the way old houses get quiet, not peaceful, just empty. There's a difference. I'd learned that difference the hard way. I poured my first cup and stood by the window the way I always did, looking at the small framed photo Eleanor had put on the sill the last summer she was well enough to rearrange things. It was the two of us at a vineyard in Napa. She was laughing at something I'd said, head thrown back completely unguarded. I'd been trying to remember what the joke was for 2 years now. Couldn't. "Morning, Elle," I said to the photo the way I always did. The coffee was too hot. I drank it anyway. Upstairs, my suitcase was packed and zipped 3 weeks' worth of clothes, the good walking shoes Eleanor had bought me for our anniversary trip we never got to take, and a small velvet box containing her favorite pearl earrings that I'd decided somewhere around midnight to bring along. Not to give to anyone, just to have near me. Sentimental, sure. I was 69 years old, and I'd buried my wife. I'd earned sentimental. The trip to Europe had been my idea. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, 21 days, first class, everything. I'd written the check without blinking. Not because money meant nothing to me, but because I'd spent 40 years building Colt industrial materials from a single truck and a handshake loan. And if I couldn't use what I'd built to sit across a dinner table in Paris with my son, then what exactly had I been building it for? Marcus was 36. Married 3 years to Diana. 2 years since Eleanor passed. 2 years of phone calls that got shorter every month, holiday dinners where his eyes were always somewhere else, birthday texts instead of visits. I'd told myself it was grief. I'd told myself marriages take adjustment. I'd told myself a lot of things at 2 in the morning when the house was too quiet. The Europe trip was supposed to fix that. Or at least crack the door open enough to start fixing it. I was pulling up my flight confirmation on my phone departure at 2 p.m. Charleston to Japan to. Okay. Then overnight to Paris when the screen lit up with a new message from Marcus. I smiled before I even read it. My son was checking in before a big trip. That was something, wasn't it? That was the beginning of something. I opened the message. I read it once. Then I read it again slower the way I used to read contracts when something felt wrong, but I couldn't find the clause yet. "Dad, don't come to the airport. Diana says this trip is for real family only. Europe isn't for you. Stay home and enjoy your retirement. Stop being the extra person in our family photos." The coffee mug slipped out of my hand. I didn't grab for it. I just watched it fall. Watched it hit the tile and shatter into 4 clean pieces, dark coffee spreading out across the grout lines like ink. The sound was sharp and final, like something snapping that had been under pressure for a long time. I stood there in my socks, coffee soaking into the fabric, and I read the message a third time. "Stop being the extra person in our family photos." My chest felt like someone had reached in and closed a fist around everything inside it. I'd been hit before business deals that collapsed a lawsuit in 2009 that nearly took everything the morning the doctor used the word terminal in a sentence about Eleanor. I knew what it felt like when the ground moved. But this was different. This wasn't a business problem. This wasn't medical language I needed to process. This was my son's phone number on a screen, and those were words that no father should ever have to read before 6 in the morning. My first reaction was the obvious one, the one that rose up hot and immediate, the one that wanted to call Marcus back and say things I'd never be able to unsay. I recognized that feeling. I'd felt it before in negotiations when someone put something insulting on the table and waited to see if you'd react. That was the thing about 40 years of boardrooms and handshake deals and men who smiled while they lied to your face. You learned to recognize bait. And something in the precision of those words, real family, only extra person, enjoy your retirement, didn't feel like a son venting frustration. It felt curated. It felt like language that had been chosen carefully, the way language gets chosen when someone is trying to produce a specific effect. My hands were completely steady as I bent down and picked up the broken pieces of the mug. I set them on the counter. I poured a second cup. I stood at the window and looked at Eleanor's photo, and for a long moment, the kitchen was absolutely silent, except for the sound of the neighborhood starting to wake up outside. What does a man do, I thought, when the thing he's been most afraid of turns out to be worse than he imagined? I didn't have an answer yet. But I had something I'd relied on my entire career, the instinct that told me when a number didn't add up. When a report looked clean, but something underneath it didn't smell right. And every instinct I had was telling me that text message was not the whole story. I picked up my phone. My son's name was still on the screen, that message still open, those words, still sitting there like something that couldn't be unread. I didn't text back. I called. 4 rings. I counted them the way you count seconds during a thunderstorm, waiting to hear how far away the lightning actually was. On the 4th ring, someone picked up. It wasn't Marcus. Raymond. Diana's voice came through like a blade wrapped in silk, smooth enough on the surface, but you could feel the edge underneath if you pressed. She said my name the way someone says a wrong answer they've already decided to ignore. Diana. I kept my voice level the way I'd kept it level in 100 meetings where the other side thought they had me. I need to speak with Marcus. He's getting ready. A pause too short to be natural, too long to be nothing. You got his message. I got a message, I said. I'd like to hear it from him. I heard her shift the sound of a room fabric moving, and then underneath it, faintly, a breath that wasn't hers. Marcus was there. In that room, close enough to hear both sides of the conversation, choosing not to speak. That told me more than the text had. There's nothing to discuss, Diana said, and her voice dropped half a degree in temperature. This trip is about our family unit, Raymond. Our immediate family. You have to understand that Ethan and I need time that isn't complicated. Complicated, I repeated. You ask too many questions, she said. You make everything heavy. Every dinner, every holiday, every phone call, it becomes about you and what you need. We need this time. I let that sit for a second. Not because it hurt me into silence, though parts of it did sting the way things sting when they're designed to, but because I was listening to the rhythm of it. The cadence. The word choices. Family unit. Immediate family. Complicated. These weren't the words of a woman venting frustration. These were the words of someone who'd rehearsed. Diana, I said, whose decision was this? It was a mutual. I'm asking you a direct question. Whose decision was it to send that message? Another pause. Longer this time. We discussed it together, she said, and I could hear the slight tightening in her jaw, the micro-adjustment of someone who just realized they stepped into a corner. Marcus and I are on the same page. Then let me speak to Marcus. He doesn't want to talk right now. That's fine, I said. I'll wait. The silence that followed was electric. I heard Diana cover the phone not well enough, and a brief muffled exchange. Marcus's voice low and tense, Her voice sharper clipped. A negotiation happening in real time with me on hold like a client in a waiting room. Then she came back. Raymond. Her tone had changed. The silk was gone. What replaced it was something colder, something that had apparently decided politeness was no longer useful. You thought you still had control here. You're a 69-year-old man who keeps showing up where he isn't wanted. You're a walking checkbook that's slowly losing its value. Sign the restructuring papers when Stephen brings them by, and at least you'll get to spend your final years somewhere comfortable. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. My jaw tightened. My right hand holding the phone pressed just slightly harder against my ear. Sign the restructuring papers. There it was. She hadn't meant to say it. Or maybe she had. Maybe she'd calculated that I was already rattled enough that it would slide past me. Either way, the mask had slipped exactly 1 inch, and in that inch I saw the whole picture. "What papers, Diana?" I asked. My voice was quiet, conversational. The kind of quiet that in 40 years of business had made more than one person across a table realize they'd made a serious miscalculation. Dead air, not a pause this time. A full, cold silence that stretched 2 seconds longer than it should have. Then the line went dead. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone. The broken mug pieces still on the counter, coffee still drying on the tile around my feet. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler kicked on. A car backed out of a driveway 2 houses down. The world was continuing its ordinary Tuesday morning, completely indifferent to the fact that something had just cracked open inside my chest. But here's what 40 years of building something from nothing teaches you. It teaches you the difference between the pain that breaks you and the pain that sharpens you. Eleanor always said I didn't know how to grieve. She was right about that. But she also knew that when I was hurt, I didn't collapse. I got methodical. I set the phone face down on the counter. I grabbed a dish towel and crouched down and cleaned up the coffee on the floor piece by piece, shard by shard, slow and deliberate. And while my hands did that automatic work, my mind did what it had always done when something in a report didn't reconcile. It started building a list. Restructuring papers. What papers? When had anyone mentioned papers, Stephen? Who was Stephen? The name had come out of her mouth with the ease of someone who assumed I already knew it, which meant she'd been planning to introduce him soon. A lawyer, almost certainly. Sign the papers and you'll spend your final years somewhere comfortable. A nursing home. She'd been talking about a nursing home not as a concern, but as a bargaining chip. You're a walking checkbook that's slowly losing its value. Not the words of a daughter-in-law frustrated with her father-in-law. The words of someone who had assessed me, categorized me, decided what I was worth and what I was becoming. And Marcus, my son, my 36-year-old son, had been in that room the entire time, close enough to hear her call his father a walking checkbook, and he had not said a single word. I stood up and looked at Eleanor's photo on the sill. Her smile was exactly the same as it always was, frozen in that vineyard afternoon, completely unaware of this kitchen this morning, this particular weight pressing down on her husband's shoulders. I should have listened to you, I said to her, because Eleanor had never trusted Diana. Not from the first dinner, not from the engagement, not from the wedding. She'd never said it outright, that wasn't Eleanor's way, but I'd seen it in the small things. The way she'd go quiet when Diana spoke. The way she'd find a reason to change the subject. The way she'd looked at me once, just once, with those gray eyes of hers and said, "Raymond, I hope Marcus knows what he's choosing." I told her she was being overprotective. I picked up my phone and I did the one thing I was absolutely certain Diana had not expected me to do. I didn't call back. I didn't send an angry text. I didn't drive to Marcus's house to demand an explanation. I called Frank Aldridge. It was not yet 6:30 in the morning, and Frank answered on the second ring, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of lawyer he was. "Frank," I said, "I need to see you today. Something is wrong, and I think it's been wrong for longer than I realized." I drove home in the kind of silence that has weight to it. Not peaceful silence, not the comfortable quiet of a man who's processed something and made his peace. The silence of a man who's holding a live wire and trying very hard not to let it touch anything flammable before he gets somewhere safe. My house looked exactly the same as it always did. The oak tree in the front yard, Eleanor had insisted on keeping when we redid the landscaping. The porch light she'd picked out from a catalog one rainy Saturday. The doormat that said, "Welcome in," faded letters because we'd never gotten around to replacing it. Ordinary, unchanged, like nothing inside had shifted. I went straight past the kitchen without looking at the counter where the broken mug pieces were still sitting, and walked down the hall to the room Eleanor had always called my thinking place. I pushed open the door, and the smell hit me first, that particular combination of old paper wood polish and something faintly floral that I'd never been able to identify and had stopped trying to. It was Eleanor's smell. It lived in this room the way she'd lived in this house, quietly, completely, in every corner. Her reading glasses were still on the side table. 2 years and I hadn't moved them. "Okay," I said out loud to the empty room, because sometimes you need to hear your own voice to know you're still standing. "Let's start from the beginning." I sat down at my desk and pulled out the accordion file from the bottom drawer, the one I hadn't touched since the week after the funeral, the one that held every document that had seemed important enough to keep and too painful to look at. I set it on the desk and unzipped it slowly. The power of attorney was near the top. I lifted it out and spread it flat on the desk in front of me. I remembered the night I signed this. Marcus had brought a lawyer to the hospital, smooth professional, spoke in that particular soft register people use around the dying and the grieving. He'd explained the document in broad strokes, limited authority, activated only if Raymond became incapacitated, standard estate protection language. I'd been awake for 36 hours. Eleanor was down the hall. I'd signed it because Marcus had asked me to, and because I didn't have the bandwidth to argue about paperwork when my wife was losing a fight. I couldn't help her win. Now I read every single word. By page 3, my jaw was clenched so tight my back teeth ached. By page 5, my left hand had formed a fist on the desk without my consciously deciding to make it. The language was different from what I remembered, not entirely, not obviously, but in the specific places that mattered. Phrases like, including but not limited to transfer of equity interests in any and all corporate entities, and restructuring of business assets at the agent's sole discretion. Buried inside paragraphs that opened with perfectly reasonable language about medical decisions and financial management, like a blade hidden inside a loaf of bread. "They changed it," I said out loud. My voice came out rough, scraped raw. "They changed it after I signed it." I set the document aside and opened my laptop. I still had administrative credentials for Colt Industrial's back-end financial system. My name was on the founding documents, and in 2 years of gradually stepping back, nobody had thought to revoke my access. Either they'd assumed I'd never use it, or they'd been too careful in other areas to notice this particular oversight. Either way, it was mine. I typed in my password and pulled up the transaction history for the past 18 months. The first 12 months looked exactly right. I knew these numbers the way I knew my own handwriting: payroll cycles, vendor contracts, equipment, leases, quarterly insurance premiums. 40 years of building this company meant the financial rhythm of it was in my bones. Then I hit the most recent 6 months, and the rhythm broke. 3 transfers, each one sitting just below the $10,000 threshold. 9,800, 9,400, 9,600. The kind of careful, deliberate spacing that accountants call structuring and federal prosecutors call a crime. In the United States, deliberately breaking up transactions to keep them under the Bank Secrecy Act's mandatory reporting threshold is a federal offense, whether the money itself is clean or not. Whoever had set this up knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how close to the line they could dance. Each transfer was categorized under a line item labeled Consulting and Advisory Services. I had never approved a consulting contract in that range. I had never approved a consulting contract with the receiving entity at all. I clicked through to the recipient account details and felt the air leave my lungs. Voss Capital, LLC. I stared at that name for a long time. Voss. Diana's name before she became Diana Colt, the name she'd shed so completely that half of Charleston had no idea it had ever existed. And here it was, sitting in my company's financials like it owned the place, because that was exactly what they were planning. To make it own the place, my chest felt like it was being compressed from both sides simultaneously. I printed the transaction records, 3 pages, nothing dramatic on the surface, devastating in context, and folded them into my jacket's inside pocket. Then I took the power of attorney, the printed transactions, and my car keys, and I walked back through the house. I stopped in the kitchen. The broken mug pieces were exactly where I'd left them, the dried coffee stains still spreading across the grout lines like a map of something that couldn't be unwritten. I looked at Eleanor's photo on the windowsill, that vineyard afternoon, that laugh that had nothing to hide. "You tried to tell me," I said. "You tried so many times to tell me." She had never trusted Diana. Not from the first meeting, not from the engagement, not from the wedding where she'd worn a smile so practiced it looked almost real. Eleanor had told me once, standing in this exact kitchen after a Sunday dinner, where Diana had redirected every conversation back to herself, she'd told me quietly without drama, "Raymond, I hope Marcus understands what he's walking toward." I'd told her she was being protective, that all mothers struggled with daughters-in-law, that Diana was just adjusting. I'd been wrong, and Eleanor had been right, and Eleanor wasn't here to say so, and that was the specific grief that pressed down on me hardest as I locked the front door behind me and walked to my car. Frank answered on the second ring the way he always did. "I'm on my way," I said. "I have the power of attorney, and I have transaction records. Frank, someone has been draining my company into a shell account for 6 months, and I need to know if you recognize the name Voss Capital LLC. A pause on the other end. Short but charged. "Raymond," Frank said, and his voice had the particular weight of a man who's about to confirm something he'd hoped he wouldn't have to. "I recognize that name. Don't go through any yellow lights getting here." I pressed the accelerator and didn't look back. Frank Aldridge had been my attorney for 22 years, and in that time I had seen him rattled exactly once the day a federal audit notice arrived with 96 hours notice and no explanation. He'd kept his voice level that day, but his left hand had tapped the desk in a pattern that I recognized now as his tell, a rhythm like a metronome when he was working through something that genuinely concerned him. His left hand was tapping when I walked into his office that morning. I set the power of attorney and the transaction records on his desk without a word. He put on his reading glasses and picked up the documents the way a surgeon picks up something that needs to be examined before it can be treated carefully without emotion already diagnosing. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the second hand on the old watch he'd worn since 1987. 7 full minutes passed. I sat across from him and waited because I had learned a long time ago that interrupting Frank Aldridge while he was reading was like pulling a surgeon's hand during an operation. Finally, he set the papers down. "Raymond," he said, and his voice was steady in the particular way that meant the news was bad and he'd already decided how to deliver it. "That text message Marcus sent you this morning wasn't cruelty." I frowned hard. It felt pretty deliberate to me. "Oh, it was deliberate," Frank said. "It was a trigger. Think through what would have happened if you'd responded the way they expected. You drive to Mount Pleasant in the middle of the morning. You pound on the door. You demand to be heard. You raise your voice. You say things that get recorded on a doorbell camera on a phone by a neighbor walking a dog. Maybe you send texts that sound threatening. Maybe you make a scene at the airport." He leaned forward. "And then Diana's attorney walks into a South Carolina family court with a documented pattern of erratic, emotionally volatile behavior and files for emergency guardianship. At which point a judge starts asking whether Raymond Colt is competent to manage his own affairs. The word guardianship hit me somewhere behind the sternum, with the force of something much heavier than a word. "That's what the restructuring papers are for," I said. "Not just to take the assets, to establish control over me." "Both," Frank said flatly. "The papers are designed to do both simultaneously, but Raymond, the power of attorney, is the more urgent problem." He tapped the document. "Your signature on this is genuine. I can see that. But pages 3 through 7 were not what you signed. The language on those pages was inserted after the fact. Someone altered the original document physically, reconstructed it around your legitimate signature to include corporate equity transfer authority. That means this paper right now could be presented to a court or a financial institution as authorization for Marcus to restructure and transfer your controlling stake in Colt Industrial without requiring any further consent from you." My hands were braced flat on the arms of the chair. I pressed down until I could feel the wood grain through my palms. "How is that possible? Doesn't the notarization cover the full document?" "It should," Frank said, and the word "should" carried everything. "The notary stamp covers the pages that were present at signing. If the document was reconstructed after the fact, and the stamp was transferred or replicated, which requires skill and resources, not magic, it becomes very difficult to prove in court without forensic document analysis, which I am ordering today." He picked up his pen. "We file a challenge to the document's validity this afternoon. That freezes any asset transfer authority tied to this paper while the challenge is pending. It also puts anyone who tries to use the document on notice that they're walking into a fraud case." He looked up at me over his reading glasses. "I should have reviewed this when you first signed it. I should have insisted. I should have called you before I signed it," I said. "We were both asleep at the wheel. We were both trusting your son," Frank said quietly. "That's different." He stood and walked to the filing cabinet in the corner. 4 metal drawers, physical documents, only because Frank had never trusted anything he couldn't hold in his hands. He opened the 3rd drawer and began moving through folders with practiced efficiency until he stopped and pulled one out. Thick, worn at the edges, handled many times over many years. He set it on the desk between us. The date tab read 2013. "Voss Holdings versus Colt Industrial Materials," Frank said. "You sued them for predatory interference in your regional contracts. Bribed subcontractors, false regulatory complaints, stolen client relationships. You spent 8 months building the case and won a full judgment in November of that year." "I remember every day of it," I said. "The case had nearly broken me financially before the ruling came through. Victor Voss came after my company like it was personal." "It was personal for him," Frank said. "His company was built on methods that couldn't survive scrutiny, and you forced scrutiny." He opened the folder and turned it toward me, his finger resting on a name in the case notes. "Victor Voss died 14 months after the ruling. 58 years old. Cardiac event officially. By then the company was gone, the assets liquidated, the reputation destroyed." Frank's finger moved down the page. "He had a daughter," Frank said. "And Raymond, what she did with her father's name is something you need to see in full. Come back tomorrow. I'll have everything pulled." I heard the words. I processed the words. And then something in my chest tore open with a pain that was not quite physical and not quite emotional, but lived somewhere in the territory between them, hot and ragged and absolute. "Diana," I said. The name came out barely above a breath. "Diana," Frank confirmed. I gripped the arms of the chair until my knuckles went white. The fury hit first, the scalding, righteous fury of a man who has been hunted in his own home and called it family. Then, underneath it, deeper and colder, and far more devastating, the grief. 3 years of dinners and holidays and birthdays, and the woman across the table from me had been counting every single one of them toward a debt she'd decided I owed her father. She wasn't after the money, I said, and my voice came out raw as an open wound. This whole thing, the marriage, the years of it, the patience of it, it was never about the money. The money is the vehicle, Frank said carefully. You are the destination. My phone rang. International number. Paris area code. I looked at Frank. He gave me a single sharp nod. I answered, and a voice came through, older, French-accented, careful, as a man speaking through a door he wasn't sure was safe to open. Raymond. Henri Beaumont, the one man still alive who had kept what he knew and had kept it long enough for it to finally matter. I have been waiting for you to call. There is something about your son you need to know. Something that happened 10 years ago. Something involving a man named Thomas Reed. His voice dropped lower, urgent now. She has been using what she knows ever since. Your son cannot leave because she will not. The line went dead. I called back. 4 rings. No answer. 5 rings. Nothing. I lowered the phone and looked at Frank across the desk, and I felt the ground under everything I thought I knew give one slow, terrible lurch. Thomas Reed, I said. New Jersey. I need everything you can find. Frank was already reaching for his phone, and the expression on his face told me that whatever we were about to find, it was going to cost more than either of us had been prepared to pay. Frank's storage room smelled like every important secret I'd ever trusted, to paper dust, old ink, and the particular stillness of things that had been waiting a long time to be found. He pulled the chain on the overhead bulb, and the yellow light fell across 4 decades of filing cabinets, each drawer labeled in his tight, precise handwriting. He went straight to the 3rd cabinet from the left, 2nd drawer from the bottom, the way a man goes to something he's been thinking about since the moment you walked through his door. 2013, he said more to himself than to me, and lifted out a folder thick enough to use as a doorstop. He carried it back to his desk and laid it open between us, and even before I read the first page, I felt the past lean forward and breathe on the back of my neck. Voss Holdings versus Colt Industrial Materials. Filed March 2013. Settled by judgment November 2013. I remembered that case the way you remember a car accident. Not every detail, but the impact. The sudden violence of it. Victor Voss had been an aggressive competitor who crossed every line available to him, stolen contracts, bribed subcontractors, false regulatory complaints filed against 3 of my regional operations. I'd spent 8 months and more money than I care to think about proving every single one of them in court. I won. Victor Voss lost everything. He died 14 months after the ruling, Frank said, his finger moving down a page of notes. 58 years old. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but by all accounts, the man had been destroyed long before his heart gave out. His company gone, his reputation gone, his assets liquidated to cover the judgment. Frank looked up. He had a daughter, 19 years old when the case was filed, 22 when he died. My throat felt like something was sitting on it. She changed her name, her mother's maiden name. She was Diana Mercer for 4 years, through college, through graduate school, through the early part of her career in finance. Frank closed the folder and looked at me directly. Then she became Diana Voss again, right around the time she moved to Charleston, right around the time she met Marcus. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed through the burning behind my eyes. Not tears, I was too far past tears for this particular conversation. Just heat. The kind that builds when you understand fully and completely that you have been played by someone who spent years learning exactly how to play you. She wasn't after the business, I said, my voice scraping out rough and low. She was after me. The whole time, every dinner, every holiday, every time she smiled at me across that table, she was after me. That's my read, Frank said quietly. The financial fraud is real. The asset transfer scheme is real. But Raymond, a woman who changes her name, engineers a marriage, and spends 3 years positioning herself. That's not greed. That's obsession. And obsession makes people take risks that greed alone never would. The computer on his desk chimed. Frank turned to look at it, then stood up fast enough that his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "It's from Henri," he said. I was around the desk before he finished the sentence. The email was brief, the address encrypted. Henri had clearly been preparing for exactly this kind of communication, which told me he'd been afraid for longer than I realized. The message read, "Raymond, I could not speak. Someone has been watching my building for 3 days. I did not know who sent them until yesterday, when I recognized a face from the 2013 proceedings. What I need to tell you is about Marcus and a man named Thomas Reed. New Jersey, 10 years ago. I cannot write the details here, but I need you to understand she has been using what she knows ever since. Marcus cannot leave her because she will not let him. Come to Paris or send someone you trust. I will only speak in person. Be careful." I read it twice. My hands were flat on the desk on either side of the keyboard, and I could feel my own pulse in my palms. "Henri is being watched," I said, "by someone connected to the 2013 case." Frank's voice was careful, controlled, the voice he used when he was keeping himself from reacting so I could. "Raymond, whatever happened with Thomas Reed, Diana knows about it. She's been holding it over Marcus for years. That's why your son doesn't push back. That's why he goes along with everything she tells him to do. He's not just a weak man who fell under a manipulative woman's influence." He paused. "He's trapped. Trapped." The word landed in my chest like a stone dropped into deep water, sending ripples outward in every direction. Trapped was different from complicit. Trapped was different from willing. Trapped meant there might still be something left of the son I knew buried under whatever Diana had built on top of him. Or it might mean nothing of the sort. I didn't know yet. And not knowing was its own particular kind of agony. "Book a secure line to Henri," I said. "And Frank, I need everything publicly available on Thomas Reed. New Jersey, 16 years ago. Missing persons, open cases, anything." Frank nodded and reached for his phone. Then he stopped. "Raymond, there's one more thing." He turned back to his computer, opened a different window, the company travel booking system that Marcus still used the corporate account for. "While you were reading Henri's email, I checked the system." He turned the screen toward me. "Marcus Colt, Paris, France. Departure, October 15th. One way." One way. My stomach went cold and hard as river rock. "He's not going for a vacation," I said. "No," Frank said. "He's not." I straightened up and looked at the window, Charleston afternoon traffic moving past on the street below, ordinary and indifferent. Somewhere out there, my son had booked a one-way ticket to the city, where the one man who could expose everything was living under surveillance. I had 6 weeks. The drive home took 12 minutes. I know because I counted every red light, 4 of them, and at each one I sat with my hands perfectly still on the wheel and talked myself back from the edge of the thing that wanted to take over. Rage is a luxury I stopped being able to afford sometime around my 50th birthday. When you run a company, when people's livelihoods depend on your decisions, you learn fast that the most dangerous thing in any room is a man who's letting his emotions drive. Rage makes you loud. Loud makes you readable. Readable makes you beatable. I was not going to be beatable. Not by Diana Voss. Not by anyone who had spent 3 years sitting at my dinner table plotting my destruction. Carol was already at the house when I pulled in. I'd called her from Frank's parking lot, kept my voice steady, said only that I needed her there before 6. She was my younger sister by 4 years, and she knew me well enough to hear everything I hadn't said. Doug Merritt's truck was parked behind hers. Doug had been my closest friend since we were both 23 and working construction in the summer heat to save money for our first business ventures. He showed up when Carol called him the same way he'd shown up every time anything had gone wrong in the last 46 years. I walked through my own front door and felt something in my chest crack open just slightly at the sight of both of them standing in my kitchen, Carol with her arms already crossed and her jaw set. Doug with a coffee mug in both hands, and worry carved deep into the lines of his face. "Raymond," Carol said, and her voice wobbled at the edges. "What happened? You sounded—" "I'll tell you everything," I said. "Sit down." I talked for 40 minutes without stopping. I laid it all out, the text message, Diana's words on the phone, the power of attorney Voss. Capital Frank's revelation about Victor Voss, Henri Beaumont's encrypted email, the one-way ticket to Paris. By the time I finished, Carol's eyes were glassy with the kind of fury that looks almost exactly like grief, and Doug had set his mug down so carefully it didn't make a sound. "We call the police," Carol said immediately, her voice fierce and tight. "Right now, tonight, we call and tell them what—" I kept my voice gentle. "That my daughter-in-law altered a legal document. We have suspicion, Carol. We have Frank's analysis and Henri's email and 3 transactions below the reporting threshold. That's not enough. Not yet." "Then what?" Doug asked. He was watching me the way he always did when he knew I'd already decided something and was working my way towards saying it out loud. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want," I said. Carol's head snapped up. "Raymond!" "Not really," I said. "But they need to believe I am." I leaned forward, elbows on the kitchen table, and looked at both of them. Diana built this whole thing on one assumption, that the text message would break me. That I'd react like a hurt old man, cry rage, make mistakes. And then when Stephen Pratt shows up with those restructuring papers, I'd be too emotionally compromised to read them carefully. I felt my jaw set. So I'm going to give her that. I'm going to be exactly what she thinks I am. "You're going to pretend," Doug said slowly. "I'm going to be tired," I said. Confused. A little forgetful. A man who got his heart broken by his son's text message and hasn't fully recovered. A man who's grieving and distracted and just wants peace in his family. I sat back. And while I'm doing that, Frank is filing the challenge to the power of attorney. Holloway is running the financial investigation. "Who's Holloway?" Carol interrupted. "James Holloway, former FBI Financial Crimes Division. Frank's brought him in." I looked at her steadily. He's seen this structure before the shell company, the transfer pattern. He knows how to build a case that will hold in federal court. Carol pressed her fingers against her mouth. Her eyes were filling up despite herself, and I watched her blink hard, twice, refusing to let the tears come. "Raymond, this is your son," she said, and her voice broke on the last word just slightly. "This is Marcus. You used to carry him on your shoulders." My chest ached so deeply, it was almost physical. "I know who he was," I said quietly. "I'm still trying to figure out who he is now." Doug reached across the table and put his hand over mine for exactly 3 seconds. That was Doug, always precise, even in comfort, then pulled back. "What do you need from us?" "Witnesses," I said. "And anchors. I need people who know who I actually am, so that when Diana tries to paint me as confused and incompetent, there are people who've been watching me think clearly through all of this." I looked at both of them. "Can you do that?" "Obviously," Carol said, and wiped her eye fast, almost angry at herself for the tear. "Don't even have to ask," Doug said. My phone buzzed on the table between us. All 3 of us looked at it. "Marcus." I let it ring once. Then I picked it up with the hand that wasn't quite steady, not from age, from anger. I was choosing to hold very carefully, and answered. "Hey, son." My voice came out worn, soft. The voice of a man who'd had a hard day and hadn't slept well in years, which wasn't entirely a performance. Isabam. Dad. Marcus sounded clipped, prepared. I just wanted to make sure you got my message this morning about the trip. I did, I said. I was upset. I've been sitting with it. A pause. Then smoother. The family lawyer, Stephen Pratt, is going to reach out this week about some paperwork for your estate planning. It's routine, but it would mean a lot if you'd cooperate. It's for everyone's benefit. Estate planning. He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed enough times that it's stopped meaning anything. Of course, I said softly. Whatever you need, Marcus. I just want peace. I heard something on the other end of the line, not quite a breath of relief, but close. The small, involuntary relaxation of a man who'd been braced for a fight and didn't get one. Good, he said. Good. I'll have Stephen call you. We hung up. Carol was staring at me across the table. How did you do that? Because I meant part of it, I said. And that was the truest thing I'd said all day. I looked at Eleanor's photo on the kitchen windowsill that vineyard afternoon, that unguarded laugh. I'm going to need you to be with me on this L, I thought. Because what I'm about to do is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I built a company from nothing, so that should tell you something. Stephen Pratt called on a Wednesday morning, exactly 4 days after Marcus's phone call, and his voice had that particular brand of professional warmth that costs $400 an hour to produce. Mr. Colt, I represent Marcus and Diana in some estate planning matters. I'd love to stop by at your convenience. Nothing formal, just a conversation about some documents that would help protect your legacy going forward. Protect your legacy. I'd heard that phrase in boardrooms for 40 years, and it always meant the same thing: someone wanted something, and had decided to dress the want in language that made you feel good about handing it over. Of course, I said, and let my voice go soft and a little slow, like a man who'd been sitting alone too long. Come by Thursday, around 2. I spent Wednesday evening practicing in front of the bathroom mirror, which is not something I ever imagined doing at 69 years old. I practiced the slight furrow between the brows, the look of a man working just a little harder than he used to, the way tiredness lives in the shoulders before it shows in the face. A small hesitation before answering, just a half-beat longer than normal, the kind that makes people speak more carefully around you because they've decided you need the extra time. I was ready by Thursday morning. Stephen Pratt arrived at 2 o'clock sharp in a charcoal suit and a handshake that was designed to feel reassuring. He was maybe 40, clean-cut, the kind of man who'd been hired specifically because he looked trustworthy. Marcus came in behind him, and my heart clenched so hard at the sight of my son that for a moment the performance nearly slipped. Marcus was wearing a jacket I'd given him 2 Christmases ago. He didn't meet my eyes when he came through the door. "Dad," he said, and his voice was careful as a man walking on ice. "Marcus." I let my face do something genuinely soft, because some part of what I felt in that moment was genuinely soft grief wearing the face of love, which is the most painful combination there is. "Good to see you, son. Come in, come in." We sat in the living room, Stephen on the couch, Marcus in the armchair to my left, me in Eleanor's wingback chair that I'd pulled into the room that morning, specifically so I'd have something solid at my back. Stephen opened his briefcase and produced a binder with the pleasant efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. He set it on the coffee table and turned it toward me. "Mr. Colt, what we've put together here is a restructuring framework," he said, warm and measured. "It's designed to modernize the corporate structure of Colt Industrial, reduce your personal liability exposure, and ensure a smooth transition of management responsibilities going forward. All very standard for a company at this stage." I leaned forward and peered at the binder the way a man peers at a menu when the font is slightly too small. "Restructuring," I said slowly. "Now what does that mean exactly for a company like mine?" Stephen smiled the patient smile of someone who'd expected exactly this question and had prepared an answer designed to satisfy without informing. It means reorganizing the ownership structure into a holding company framework. Your assets are better protected, management is streamlined, and the company is positioned for the next generation. The next generation, I repeated, nodding slowly like I was absorbing this. That's Marcus. And Diana, yes. They'd take an active management role. I turned a page of the binder with the careful deliberateness of a man who reads slowly, and while my visible hand turned pages at the pace of someone mildly confused, my right hand moved to the phone in my shirt pocket, angled the camera through the fabric gap at the third button, and pressed the shutter on the pages I needed most. Frank had shown me how to do it the night before. I'd practiced it 40 times until the motion was invisible. Now this section here, I said, pointing to a clause I'd already photographed twice. Can you explain this part again? I want to make sure I understand what I'm signing. Stephen explained. I asked him to explain it again. I got the names of 2 provisions slightly wrong and watched Stephen gently correct me. I asked about a clause I already knew the answer to just to see how he framed it. He was good, smooth patient, never condescending. Diana had hired well. Marcus sat through all of it without saying a word. At one point I glanced at him, and he was looking at his hands in his lap with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Something closer to the look of a man who's been carrying something heavy for so long that he's stopped noticing the weight until he's forced to sit still. I'll need a few days, I said, finally closing the binder with the slow care of someone who's tired and doesn't want to make a mistake. I'd like to have my doctor look at this with me. My eyes aren't what they were. Stephen kept his smile in place. Of course, there's no rush. There was absolutely a rush, and all 3 of us in that room knew it, but only one of us was admitting it. I walked them to the door. Marcus went ahead to the car, and Stephen shook my hand again with that engineered warmth. Then my son stopped at the end of the porch steps and turned back, and for just a moment, just one unguarded second, the mask that Diana had built around him cracked at the edges, and I saw something underneath that looked almost like the boy I used to know. Young, frightened, completely lost. Then it closed again. And the man who turned back to the car was a stranger wearing my son's face. I stood in the doorway until they pulled out of the driveway. Then I called Frank and said 4 words, "I got the pages." Frank breathed out sharply. "Come in now." Because Raymond, I ran Voss Capital through our financial crime screening database last night, and what came back is not what either of us were expecting. James Holloway was already in Frank's conference room when I arrived, sitting at the far end of the table with a laptop. A legal pad covered in handwriting, and the particular stillness of a man who has spent decades watching other people's nervous energy and learned to conserve his own. Frank introduced us as I took a seat. Raymond Colt, James Holloway, retired FBI Financial Crimes Division. 18 years federal service, the last 6 running multi-jurisdictional money laundering investigations. Holloway looked at me across the table with the direct, unhurried assessment of someone who evaluated people for a living. He had gray at his temples and the kind of face that had heard every possible lie and stopped being surprised by any of them. "Mr. Colt," he said, "I've been briefed on the situation. Let me tell you what I found." "Please," I said. Holloway turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a database entry, Voss Capital LLC, registered in Delaware 18 months ago, listed business purpose, financial consulting, and asset management. Standard language. The kind of thing you can file in 20 minutes online. On paper, this is a normal shell company, Holloway said. Delaware registration, minimal public footprint, single member LLC. Nothing that would raise a flag at first glance. He tapped a key, and the screen changed. In our database, it's flagged as a known associate entity, meaning it appears in the network analysis of a larger organization we've been tracking for 4 years. A financial network that moves money out of Eastern Europe through a series of US-based holding companies, cycling it through legitimate businesses to clean the origin. The words landed on the table between us with the weight of something that couldn't be taken back. Diana is connected to an international money laundering network, I said. My voice came out flatter than I intended, scraped clean of everything except the fact itself. Diana Voss has connections to people who are connected to that network. Her father's brother, Richard Voss, is believed to be the operational link between the Voss family and that network. He took over after Victor died. Holloway said carefully, the distinction of a man who understood the difference between what could be proven and what was true. The structure she's built around Colt Industrial is consistent with how this network typically operates. They find a legitimate established company, real assets, real revenue, real history, and they restructure the ownership in a way that allows money to flow through the company's accounts and come out the other side looking clean. The company's owner either cooperates willingly or, he paused, doesn't need to cooperate at all if the right paperwork is in place. If someone has power of attorney, Frank said. Exactly. Holloway leaned forward, hands flat on the table. Mr. Colt, if that restructuring goes through, and Marcus and Diana gain legal control of Colt Industrial's financial operations, your company becomes a laundromat. And if the network ever gets investigated, your name is on the building. My throat tightened so sharply I had to swallow twice before I could speak. 40 years. 40 years of that company built from nothing, built clean, built with every legal and ethical standard I could find, because I had wanted to build something I could be proud of when I stood in front of Eleanor at the end of a long week and told her about my day. How do we stop it? I asked. We build a case, Holloway said, and we have more than I expected. He reached into a folder and slid a printout across the table to me. Your attorney forwarded me Henri Beaumont's encrypted email this morning. I want to make sure you understand what he's telling you without the words he couldn't use. I looked at the email printout. Henri's careful abbreviated language. Marcus and a man named Thomas Reed. New Jersey, 10 years ago. She has been using what she knows ever since. Thomas Reed, Holloway said. New Jersey, 2015. Listed as a missing persons case officially. He was a materials industry consultant, your industry, Mr. Colt, who was scheduled to provide testimony in a contract dispute involving Colt Industrial. He disappeared 3 days before his deposition. Holloway's voice was level and factual, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis that is going to hurt. His car was found at Newark Airport. His phone last pinged at a hotel in Parsippany, New Jersey. He was never found. The case went cold in 2017. The room felt like it had gotten smaller. My hands were pressed flat on the table, and I was pushing down hard, the way you push down on something to keep it from moving. Marcus was in New Jersey that week, I said. My own voice sounded far away to me, like I was hearing it from the bottom of a long corridor. His credit card places him at the same hotel as Thomas Reed's last known location, Holloway said. That's what's in the cold case file. It was never enough to act on no witnesses, no physical evidence, no body. Just a thread that was never pulled. He looked at me directly. Diana found that thread, and she's been holding it over your son ever since. That's why he doesn't leave. That's why he does what she tells him. She has him on a leash made out of something he can't talk about to anyone. The pain that moved through me in that moment was unlike anything I had felt since Eleanor's diagnosis. It was total, encompassing, the kind of grief that starts in the chest and radiates outward until it finds the edges of you and keeps going. My son. My 36-year-old son, who I had carried on my shoulders and taught to throw a baseball and driven to the hospital. When he broke his arm at 12, my son had been in that hotel in that town on that day, and I could not pretend I didn't know what that meant. Mr. Colt. Holloway's voice was quiet but firm. I need to ask you directly. With what you now know, do you want to help us build this case, all of it, not just the financial fraud? Everything. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth the way Eleanor had taught me to breathe when something was bigger than I thought I could hold. Then I looked at Holloway and said, "Tell me what you need." Holloway nodded, once reached for his legal pad and said, "Marcus is going to Paris, which means we have 6 weeks to make sure that when he lands, everything is already in place." He clicked his pen. "Starting tonight. There is a specific kind of acting that has nothing to do with theater. It is the kind you do when the stakes are real, and the audience is someone who wants to see you fail, and the performance has to be perfect, not because anyone will applaud you for it, but because the moment it slips, everything you've built falls apart." I had been doing that kind of acting for 3 weeks by the time October arrived, and I had gotten very good at it. Every few days I called Marcus. Not to confront, not to demand, just to check in the way a tired old man might check in with his son when the house is quiet and the evenings are long. I let my voice go soft and a little lost. I mentioned Eleanor more than usual. I said things like, "I've been thinking about what you said, and I just want things to be right between us," in the particular tone of a man who's grieving his way toward surrender. And I could hear it working. Each call, Marcus's voice relaxed a fraction more. The careful, clipped responses loosened slightly at the edges. He was buying it, or Diana was telling him I was buying it, which amounted to the same thing. Meanwhile, Holloway was working with Interpol's Paris office, through a contact he'd kept from his FBI years, briefing them on Voss Capital, on Diana's network connections, on Henri Beaumont, and his significance as a witness. Frank had filed the document fraud challenge quietly, through a channel that wouldn't surface in any public record until we were ready for it to surface. The trap was being built one wire at a time, but there was a piece I needed to set myself. I called Marcus on a Tuesday afternoon and said I'd like to have dinner. Just the two of us, no pressure, a quiet place. I could hear the hesitation on his end, the brief calculation that always happened when Marcus was deciding whether something was safe. Then Diana must have signaled something from wherever she was standing in the room, because he said yes. We met at a steakhouse downtown that Marcus had liked since he was in his 20s. Dark wood leather booths, the kind of place that felt serious without being formal. He was already there when I arrived, and the sight of him hit me the same way it always did, now that collision between the son I remembered and the stranger he'd become happening simultaneously in the same face and body. He stood up when I came in, and there was a moment, just a half second, where something genuine moved across his expression. Something that might have been relief, or might have been guilt, or might have been both dressed up as each other. "Dad." He put his hand on my arm briefly when I sat down, the kind of touch that wants to be more than it allows itself to be. "Marcus." I patted his hand and let my eyes go a little watery. Not hard to do because the emotion underneath the performance was completely real. "Thank you for coming." We ordered. We talked about surface things, the weather, a local construction project I mentioned with the wandering interest of a man who had nothing better to think about. Marcus relaxed by degrees like a man in cold water, slowly realizing the temperature wasn't going to kill him. His shoulders came down. He asked about my doctor's appointment. He told me haltingly about a project at work. The sentences didn't connect well the way sentences don't when someone is choosing each one carefully, but the effort was there. And I thought Diana has no idea how much damage she's done to him. Not to me. To him. "I've been doing some clearing out," I said when the main course arrived. I cut into my steak with the unhurried movements of a man with nowhere to be. "Going through some old files. Business contacts I haven't thought about in years." Marcus lifted his water glass. "That's good, Dad." "One name kept coming up," I said, keeping my voice conversational, almost drowsy. "Fellow I did business with years ago, based in Paris. Henri Beaumont." I shook my head slowly. "Haven't spoken to him since, must be 2013, 2014. Funny how names come back to you." The water glass stopped moving. It was a small thing. A fraction of a second interruption in the smooth arc of the glass toward his mouth. His hand completed the motion he drank. He set it down normally. To anyone watching, nothing had happened. But I had spent 40 years reading the tells that people didn't know they were giving the micro-pause in a CFO's answer, the too quick nod of a vendor who just agreed to something he hadn't fully processed, the breath that went slightly shallow when a number on a spreadsheet landed wrong. I had built an empire on the ability to read those signals. Marcus's hand had stopped for exactly the length of time it takes a person's brain to process a name they were not expecting and decide how to respond to it. He'd heard that name before, recently, and it frightened him. Henri Beaumont, Marcus said, and his voice was so carefully neutral that the neutrality itself was a tell. I don't think I know that name. Oh, you wouldn't, I said pleasantly, spearing a piece of potato. Old business long before your time. I was thinking I might reach out. He has some old documents I might need. Sentimental, mostly. I waved a hand loosely. Old man things. Marcus picked up his fork. His jaw was tight in the way jaws get tight when someone is working to keep a face arranged correctly. Sure, Dad. That sounds fine. We finished dinner. I drove home through Charleston streets I'd known for 40 years, and I called Holloway before I'd pulled out of the parking garage. He knows the name, I said. The moment I said Henri Beaumont, his hand stopped. He covered it well, but he stopped. Then Diana knows too, Holloway said, which means she's going to move the timeline up. Raymond, we need to accelerate the Paris coordination. If Diana decides Henri needs to be dealt with before Marcus even lands, make sure Henri is protected, I said. My voice came out harder than I intended. Whatever else happens, make sure Henri is safe. Already in motion, Holloway said. Raymond, you did well tonight. I hung up and sat in the parked car for a moment, the engine running, the heater going, the quiet Charleston night pressing against the windows. I had just used my son's fear as a fishing hook, and I had felt him bite, and I had felt nothing clean about it. This is what she made of us, I thought. This is what Diana Voss turned a father and his son into. And then I put the car in gear and drove home because there was still work to do. We are exactly halfway through this story, and I promise you what comes next will change everything you thought you understood about this family. Before I go any further, drop a number in the comments. Just type 10 if you are still here with me. I need to know you are in this room. One more thing before we continue the chapters ahead. Carry some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Not everything may unfold exactly as it happened. If that is not for you, this is a graceful place to step away. But if you are staying, hold on tight. Holloway called on the 23rd of October and said he had something I needed to see in person, not over the phone, not by email. In person with Frank present, and he paused before adding this someone I trusted who could stay with me afterward. I called Carol before I called anyone else. She arrived at Frank's office 20 minutes before I did, which meant she'd been ready the moment I asked, which meant she'd been waiting for this call. The way people wait for test results they already know are going to be bad. Frank's conference room felt smaller than usual when I walked in. Holloway was at the table, with a manila folder in front of him, thick, rubber-banded, the kind of folder that has been assembled with deliberate care. Carol sat to my right, with her hands folded on the table, and her jaw set in the particular way that meant she was holding herself very still on purpose. "Thank you for coming," Holloway said. "Tell me what's in the folder," I said. Holloway removed the rubber band and opened it. He didn't push it toward me yet. He looked at me first, the direct, frank assessment of a man who had done this before, who knew what the next few minutes were going to cost, and wanted to make sure I was prepared to pay. "Raymond," he said, "I'm going to walk you through this document carefully. Some of what's in here is evidentiary timestamps, financial records, location data. Some of it is circumstantial but compelling. All of it points in the same direction." He set both hands flat on the table. "I need you to understand, before I show you that the Thomas Reed case has never been closed. And with what's in this folder combined with Henri Beaumont's testimony, the New Jersey County Prosecutor's Office believes it can be. My throat tightened until it felt like a fist. "Show me," I said. He slid the folder across. The first page was a timeline, dates, and locations laid out in the clean, merciless columns of an investigative report. October 2009. A contract dispute involving a regional materials supplier and Colt Industrial. Thomas Reed, 44 years old, independent industry consultant, hired to provide expert testimony at a deposition scheduled for October 19th. October 16th, Thomas Reed checked into a hotel in Parsippany, New Jersey. His phone data placed him there through the evening of October 17th. Marcus Colt's credit card places him at the same hotel. Check-in October 16th. Check-out October 18th. Thomas Reed's phone went dark at 11:47 p.m. on October 17th. His car was found at Newark Liberty Airport 4 days later, keys in the ignition, no luggage, no Thomas Reed. He was never seen again. I turned the page. My hands were steady because I had decided they were going to be steady, and it was taking everything I had to honor that decision. The second page was financial records payments traced through a series of accounts that had been reconstructed painstakingly over years of cold case review. A sum of money not enormous, but significant, that had moved from an account connected to a Delaware LLC, the same structuring method, the same routing pattern that Holloway had identified in Voss Capital, to a second account that had been opened and closed within 60 days. The timeline of those transactions bracketed October 17th with a precision that made my stomach turn over. "Who controlled the Delaware LLC?" I asked. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "We believe Diana Voss," Holloway said carefully. At the time, she was 22 years old, using her mother's maiden name and working as a junior analyst at a financial firm in New York. The account was opened under a business name that connected to her employer's network. It was sophisticated work for someone that age. He paused. Which tells us she didn't do it alone. Her father's network had people who knew how to build these structures. Carol made a sound beside me, not a word, just a small, involuntary sound of distress, quickly suppressed. I reached under the table and found her hand and held it without looking at her, because if I looked at her, I would lose the composure I needed to get through the rest of this folder. "She hired someone," I said. The words tasted like gravel. She was 22 years old. Her father had just lost everything because of a lawsuit that my company brought, and she hired someone to make a witness disappear before he could testify. "That is what the evidence suggests," Holloway said. "And then she kept the evidence. Not to use against the people she hired. We believe those individuals are no longer reachable, but to use against the person who was in that hotel." He looked at me directly. Against Marcus. The pain that moved through me in that moment was the worst I had felt since the word terminal had been said in Eleanor's hospital room. And it was worse in a different way, because this pain had a human face. It had my son's face. It had the face of the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved imperfectly and incompletely and with everything I had, and it was telling me that somewhere in the gap between who I thought he was and who he had become, something had gone irrevocably wrong. "He knew what was going to happen," I said. "Not a question. We believe he was present at the hotel and aware of what Diana had arranged," Holloway said carefully. "Whether he participated directly or was simply there and said nothing afterward, that is what the DA's investigation will determine." Carol squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. I was grateful for the hurt. It gave me somewhere to put what I was feeling. "She's been holding this over him ever since," I said. "For 10 years, Holloway confirmed. Every time Marcus might have had second thoughts. Every time he might have walked away. She would remind him, not loudly, not dramatically, just a word, a look, a reference to New Jersey, enough to keep him exactly where she needed him." I set the folder down on the table and pushed it a few inches away from me, not because I was done with it, but because I needed it out of my hands for a moment. I looked at the ceiling. My eyes burned with the particular heat of grief that has nowhere to go. Not tears, exactly, just heat, the physical evidence of something enormous being held in a space too small for it. "Is there enough?" I asked. "With Henri's testimony, is there enough to take this to the DAU?" "Yes," Holloway said. "If Henri testifies to what he knows about the 2015 network, the financial structure, the people involved, the connection to Diana, combined with the cold case evidence and the current fraud investigation, yes, there is enough." I breathed in slowly through my nose. I breathed out. I picked up my phone and called Frank, who was waiting in the outer office. "Frank," I said when he answered, "it's time to open the envelope." Frank went quiet for a moment. Then soft and careful, "Eleanor's letter." "Eleanor's letter," I said. "She left me something, and I think I'm finally ready to read it." The first Monday of November arrived the way bad news always does, quietly, without warning, wrapped in something that looked almost normal. It was just past 7 in the morning when I pulled into the parking lot outside Frank Aldridge's office on King Street, Charleston. The sky above was the flat, colorless gray of old dishwater, and the coffee I had grabbed from the drive-thru sat untouched in the cup holder, already going cold. I had not slept. Not really. I had lain in bed staring at the ceiling while the city outside went through the motions of an ordinary night, and I had done what I always do when my mind refuses to stop. I made a list. Everything I knew, everything I suspected, everything that did not yet have a name. Frank was already at his desk when I walked through the door, his reading lamp burning warm against the gray light coming through the windows. A thick manila folder lay open in front of him, and 2 cups of coffee steamed on the edge of the desk he had been expecting me. "Raymond." He pushed 1 cup toward me without looking up. "Sit down. Henri came through last night." My chest seized. I pulled the chair out slowly and sat. "What did he send?" Frank slid a printed photograph across the desk, grainy, the kind of image a hotel security camera captures on its worst day, degraded by 18 years of digital compression. But the face in the frame was clear enough. Marcus. Standing in a carpeted corridor, his right hand pressed against a doorframe, his body turned slightly away from the camera, as if he already knew where not to look. "Jersey City, New Jersey," Frank said, tapping the timestamp at the bottom of the frame. "October 16th, 2009. Thomas Reed checked into that hotel the night before and never checked out. The case went cold before the end of that year. Henri kept a copy of this footage because he was Reed's former business partner, and he never believed the official explanation." My hand went numb around the coffee cup. I set it down before I dropped it. 18 years. My son had been carrying this for 18 years, and I had sat across from him at Thanksgiving tables and birthday dinners and never once seen it, not a flicker, not a crack in the surface. "Is this enough to reopen it?" I asked. "Enough to hand to Holloway, yes. But Raymond..." Frank leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his voice dropping. "Before this goes federal, you need to talk to Marcus, not to warn him, to find out exactly how much Diana knows and how long she has been using it." I drove out to Mount Pleasant, with the photograph locked in my briefcase, and something cold and heavy settled in the center of my chest, that no amount of November air coming through the car vents could touch. Marcus's house looked the same as it always did from the street shutters painted white. Diana's silver Audi in the driveway, a hanging basket of ferns by the front door, that she kept alive with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else in her life. I rang the bell. Marcus answered, and the moment his eyes landed on my face, every drop of color left his own. "Dad." His voice cracked on the single word. I didn't know you were coming." "I know." I stepped inside. The living room was spotless. A real estate magazine sat fanned open on the coffee table. Marcus closed the door behind me, and his hands were already unsteady, gripping the edge of the doorframe the way a man grabs a railing when the ground shifts under him. Diana appeared at the top of the stairs in a silk robe, her hair still damp from the shower, her expression flickering through surprise assessment and careful neutrality in the span of about 2 seconds. She was extraordinary at that, reading a room and rearranging her face before anyone else had finished blinking. Raymond. Her tone was warm, almost musical. This is early for a Monday. Diana, I said, I need 10 minutes alone with my son. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear. I do not think Diana Voss-Colt experiences fear the way other people do. It was more like the moment a chess player realizes the board has changed, and they were not the one who changed it. She descended the stairs at a measured pace, poured herself a glass of water at the kitchen counter, and then walked out through the back door into the yard without another word. Marcus stood in the middle of the living room, one hand braced against the back of an armchair, fingers pressing so hard into the leather that the material creased and held. Whatever Frank told you, he started. Henri Beaumont, I said. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Marcus's knees buckled. He caught the armchair with both hands, chest heaving, his face collapsing into something raw and wrecked and terrified that I had not seen since he was a child. His eyes filled and his jaw worked, and for a moment I thought he might actually fall. Dad, his voice shredded at the edges. Dad, please, I am not here to destroy you, I said. And even though every nerve in my body was pulled wire tight, I meant it. I need to understand. Was it an accident? Was Diana involved? Did she push you into... No. The word came out rough, scraped from somewhere deep below his ribs. No. She had nothing to do with it. That was before Diana. Thomas Reed was going to testify against a client of mine, a man who had paid me very well to make certain things disappear from a paper trail. I was 20 years old, and I was terrified, and I was stupid, and I made a choice that I have spent every single day since trying to outrun. My eyes burned. I pressed my back teeth together and breathed through my nose and refused to let myself come apart in his living room. This was my son. This was the boy Eleanor and I had driven to soccer practice every Saturday morning for 4 years. The boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat on the way home and have to be carried inside. When did Diana find out? I asked. Marcus exhaled a long, shuddering release like a man who has been holding his breath underwater and finally broken the surface. About 3 years into the marriage, she found Henri's name in an old file I thought I had destroyed. She never confronted me directly. She just filed it away. He let out a laugh that had nothing at all to do with humor. That is Diana. She does not reach for a weapon until she has already decided exactly how she is going to use it. So the restructuring, the forged power of attorney, Voss Capital, all of it, she has been using this to keep you in line. Every day. His jaw locked tight, and his eyes spilled over, not out of self-pity, but out of something that looked like genuine bone-deep shame, the kind that has had years to settle into the architecture of a person. I kept thinking I could get ahead of it. Pay enough produce, give her enough control until she felt satisfied. But she is never satisfied, Dad. Every time I gave her something, she wanted the next thing. I reached into the briefcase and set the cooperation agreement on the coffee table between us. Frank had drawn it up that morning, notarized comprehensive 3 pages laying out exactly what cooperation with the federal investigation would look like, and what protections it would offer. The photograph is already in federal hands, I said. Frank filed the preservation notice this morning. This is not a question of whether the truth comes out anymore. The only question left is whether you help close this properly or whether Diana drags you down with her when she decides to run. Marcus stared at the document. His hands were shaking so badly, the pages rattled when he reached for them. He pressed them flat against his knee, trying to hold them still, And the effort of it, the visible, desperate effort of a man trying to hold himself together with everything falling apart, nearly broke me completely. "What do I do?" he whispered. "Sign it," I said. "And then we talk. All of it. From the beginning." Marcus picked up the pen. His hand trembled the whole time, but he signed. And through the kitchen window I could see Diana standing in the backyard, in the gray November light, staring at her phone with her back perfectly straight, already 3 moves ahead, already planning her next play. She had no idea the board had already been cleared. By the time I crossed back over the Ravenel Bridge into Charleston, on the afternoon of Tuesday, November 4th, the light had already given up on the day. It was barely past 4 o'clock, but the cloud cover had thickened since morning until the whole sky sat low and pressed the kind of November afternoon that makes the inside of your car feel like the only warm place left in the world. I drove through the old neighborhood on autopilot past the oak trees that had outlived 3 generations of my family. And when I finally pulled into my own driveway on Trad Street, I sat behind the wheel for a long time before I could find the reason to go inside. The house held the particular quiet that follows a day that has taken too much out of you. I walked through the kitchen past Eleanor's row of small ceramic planters still lined up on the windowsill exactly the way she had left them, a little lopsided the way she always arranged things, practical but never quite symmetrical, and into the study at the back of the house. The safe was behind the bookshelf. It had always been there. Eleanor used to say it was the most obvious hiding place in South Carolina, and she was right, and neither of us had ever cared enough to move it. I spun the dial from memory, her birthday, then mine, then the year we married, and the door swung open with the familiar soft click that used to mean ordinary things, passports before trips, the deed after closing Marcus's original birth certificate, when he needed it for something official. At the very back of the safe, tucked behind all of that, was a cream-colored envelope. Eleanor's handwriting on the front, careful and looping the penmanship she had used her whole life, "Raymond, only when you need it most." My chest cracked open like timber in a hard freeze. I had known it was there. She had pressed it into my hands 2 weeks before she passed, sitting up in the hospital bed, with the IV taped to the inside of her elbow, and she had said, "Don't open this until something goes very wrong, Raymond. You'll know when." I had honored that for 8 months. I had opened the safe 6 times and looked at the envelope and put it back, telling myself it was not yet time. I sat down at my desk. I set the envelope directly in front of me. My hands were shaking a fine, deep tremor that had nothing to do with the temperature, and for one long moment I almost put it back again. But then Marcus's face came back to me the way his knees had buckled when I said Henri's name, the shame hollowed into every line of him like something carved. And I thought of Diana in that backyard, perfectly upright, perfectly composed, her fingers moving over her phone screen, without a single tremor in her hands. I tore the envelope open, 3 items inside. The first was a letter. 4 pages, front and back, Eleanor's voice so fully present in every sentence that twice I had to stop reading and press my palm flat against the desk just to feel something solid under my hand. I will keep most of what she wrote between the 2 of us. It belongs to us, not to this story, but the heart of it was something I had not been prepared for. "Raymond, you are the most trusting man I have ever loved, and I have loved you for that every single day. But trust is also the door they walk through when they want to take something from you. So I did what you would never think to do for yourself. I asked Carol to help me. By the time you read this, it will already be done." The second item was a notarized legal document, 12 pages dense, with the kind of formal language that exists specifically to be precise and to be permanent. I am not a lawyer, but I spent 30 years in construction contracts, and I knew how to read the heading without Frank's help. Amendment to the Raymond J. Colt Irrevocable Trust, Second Trust Instrument executed September 2nd, 2023, 2 days before Eleanor passed. I read it through twice, slowly, my finger moving along each line. Eleanor had restructured the trust from her hospital bed. She had moved every core asset, the founding shares of Colt Industrial, the Charleston and Savannah real estate portfolio, the retirement accounts, into a second separate trust instrument that required dual authorization to alter or transfer my signature and my sister Carol's, both together. Without both of us signing simultaneously, nothing could be restructured, leveraged, or moved. No power of attorney, no matter how convincingly forged, could touch it. No court-filed restructuring motion could advance without both signatures on record. Every document Diana had manipulated, every binder Stephen Pratt had pushed across a conference table, every wire transfer routed through Voss Capital LLC. All of it had been built on an asset base that Eleanor had quietly moved out of reach before any of them had made their first move. The tears came without warning, without grace, a sound that broke out of my chest before I could catch it. Rough and ugly, the kind of grief that has been waiting too long to find its shape. I pressed Eleanor's letter against my chest, and I cried the way I had not cried since the night she died, sitting alone in this same study while the rest of the house went cold around me. She had known. She had sat in that hospital room with tubes in her arm, and she had used what time and strength she had left to build a wall between me and everything that was coming for me. And she had done it without a word, without asking for credit, without letting me see it, because she knew that if she told me, I would have insisted on handling it myself, and I would have made it worse. After a while, long enough for the study window to go fully dark, I picked up my phone. Carol answered on the second ring. Her voice was careful, measured, the way it gets when she already knows why you are calling. "Raymond, you opened it." "Yes." My voice was hoarse, scraped hollow. "You knew. The whole time you knew. Eleanor made me promise." Carol's breath caught, and I heard her fighting to keep her voice steady. "She said you needed to come to it on your own. She said if I told you too soon, you would try to handle everything alone, and the people around you would see it coming." She was right. A sound escaped me that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and I did not try to stop it. She was always right. "What are you going to do now, Raymond?" I looked at the amendment in my hands, 12 pages that Eleanor had executed from a hospital bed on a Tuesday morning, 2 days before she left me. I thought about Frank Aldridge waiting for my call. I thought about James Holloway and the photograph from Jersey City. I thought about Diana in that backyard, phone in hand, back straight, already maneuvering. "I am going to call Frank," I said, "tonight. And tomorrow morning, Diana Voss Colt is going to discover that every move she has made for the last 3 years was built on ground that was never actually there." Carol's breath caught audibly, then quietly, so quietly I almost missed it. "Eleanor would be so proud of you." That hit me somewhere below the ribs, somewhere that had no armor left. I gripped the phone and pressed my free hand flat on the desk and waited until I could trust my voice again. "I hope so," I said. I ended the call. I sat alone in the study, with Eleanor's letter in my lap, and the amendment on the desk, and the cold November dark pressed thick against the windows of the house we had shared for 31 years. Then I dialed Frank Aldridge's number, and when he answered on the first ring, because Frank always answers on the first ring, I said the 6 words that set everything else into motion. "Frank, Eleanor built us a door." 3 seconds of silence on the line. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of a man absorbing the full weight of what he had just heard. Then Frank's voice came back steady and clear. "Raymond, send me everything. Tonight, all 12 pages. Tomorrow, Diana would wake up in Marcus's house in Mount Pleasant and move through her morning with the confidence of someone holding every card in the deck. She had no idea that the woman she had never once taken seriously, the quiet, practical, slightly lopsided wife who arranged ceramic planters on a kitchen windowsill, had already taken every one of those cards away. Wednesday, November 5th, came in sharp and cold. The kind of morning that reminds Charleston it does have winters, even if they arrive late and leave early. I was already dressed and on my second cup of coffee when Frank Aldridge called at 7:42, not his usual office hours, which told me everything I needed to know about the night he had just had. Raymond. His voice carried the particular energy of a man who had been awake since 3 in the morning and found the work worth it. The amendment cleared, every line. I spoke with the trust administrator at First Carolina Fiduciary at 6 this morning, and they confirmed the second trust instrument, Eleanor filed on September 2nd, supersedes every restructuring directive Marcus signed under the forged power of attorney. Every single one. It's as if Diana's entire paper trail never had a foundation to stand on. My grip on the coffee mug tightened until my knuckles ached. What does that mean in plain language, Frank? It means Voss Capital cannot touch a single asset. Not the Colt Industrial shares, not the Charleston properties, not the retirement accounts. The dual authorization requirement locks all of it until you and Carol both sign. And since you are very much not signing anything, Diana puts in front of you those assets are effectively in a vault. She does not have the combination to. Something inside my chest loosened just slightly. The way a fist unclenches after it has been closed for so long, the fingers have gone numb. I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 months. And Holloway, I asked. He filed the preservation order with the federal district court this morning. The Thomas Reed case is formally reopened as of 8 a.m. today. Holloway's team has the Henri Beaumont footage, Marcus's cooperation agreement, and the credit card placement records. They're moving fast, Raymond. Faster than I expected. I set down the coffee mug. My hand was not entirely steady. Does Diana know yet? Frank paused, the careful pause of a lawyer choosing his next words with precision. She will within the hour. First, Carolina Fiduciary is required to notify all named parties when a trust amendment supersedes prior directives. Diana is listed as an interested party through her marriage to Marcus. She will receive a formal notice letter by certified mail, and her attorney, whoever she has on retainer, will receive a courtesy call from my office at 9. I thought about Diana at her kitchen counter opening a certified envelope. I thought about her face doing that rapid recalibration, the flicker, the calculation, the adjustment. And for the first time in 2 months, I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction, not victory. Something quieter and more solid than either of those, the feeling of standing on ground that cannot be moved beneath you. There's one more thing, Frank said, and the weight in his voice made me straighten in my chair. Holloway's financial analyst ran the Voss Capital transaction records through the FinCEN database overnight. Raymond, the structured deposits the transfers just under the reporting threshold. The shell company Chains, this goes further than Diana. Richard Voss, her father, has been using Voss Capital as a conduit for at least 4 years. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is already building a parallel case. The air in the kitchen felt different after that sentence, thicker, charged the way it gets before a storm rolls in off the Atlantic. Richard Voss. The man who had built his entire identity on old money and older contempt for people like me, for people who built things with their hands instead of inheriting them. I had sat across from him at Marcus and Diana's wedding reception and smiled and shaken his hand, and he had looked at me the way a man looks at furniture. How long before they move on him? I asked. That's not our timeline to control, Frank said. Our job right now is to hold the line on your assets and support Marcus's cooperation. Holloway handles the rest. I ended the call and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at Eleanor's ceramic planters. The lopsided row of them still exactly where she left them. The gray morning light was beginning to thin at the edges, just the faintest suggestion that the sun was still out there, somewhere, working its way through. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number, just 4 words. "You should have stayed quiet." I looked at those 4 words for a long time. Then I put the phone face down on the counter, picked up my coffee, and finished it. Diana was scared, and scared people make mistakes. By Thursday morning, November 6th, the certified notice from First Carolina Fiduciary had reached Diana's attorney. I knew because Frank called me at 8:15, with a tone I had only heard from him twice before, once during a contract dispute that nearly went to the state Supreme Court, and once the night Eleanor's condition changed. Controlled, clipped, and carrying something underneath it that was trying hard not to become alarm. "Raymond, sit down if you're not already sitting." I was standing at my kitchen counter. I pulled out the stool and sat. "Tell me." Diana's attorney, a man named Carter Wills out of Columbia, very expensive, very aggressive, filed a petition in Charleston County Probate Court at 7:45 this morning. He's challenging your legal competency. He's arguing that you are experiencing cognitive decline and that the trust amendment Eleanor filed should be reviewed on the grounds that you may have been unduly influenced or incapable of properly overseeing your own estate. The words landed like a fist to the sternum. Not because I had not considered the possibility I had Frank, and I had discussed it as a theoretical threat 2 weeks ago, but because hearing it spoken out loud in formal legal terms made it suddenly brutally real. They were not going after my money directly anymore. They were going after my mind. "She's claiming I'm not competent," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, bitter in a way I had not expected. "She's claiming there is sufficient cause to appoint a guardian ad litem to review your financial decision-making. If the court grants even a preliminary hearing, it creates a window, potentially weeks, during which a judge could temporarily restrict your ability to authorize transactions, including the dual-signature trust protection." I pressed my palm flat against the counter and breathed. "What does she have?" Frank's pause carried weight. "She submitted 3 things. A sworn affidavit from a Dr. Philip Crane, a psychiatrist in Columbia, whose name I do not recognize, and whose relationship to Diana is not yet clear, citing second-hand reports of erratic behavior and confusion. A series of text messages she claims you sent to Marcus in September that are, according to her, disoriented and inconsistent. And a statement from Stephen Pratt claiming that during their October meeting you appeared confused about basic details of your own estate." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. Stephen Pratt, the polished attorney Diana had sent to my house with a restructuring binder and a pen, the man I had deliberately played, confused for asking the same question 3 times, pretending not to understand a single page. And now that performance was being used against me as evidence of genuine decline. I let out a breath that felt like it had been compressed in my chest for hours. "Frank, I need you to understand something. Every moment of confusion Stephen Pratt witnessed was deliberate. I was buying time. I know that, Raymond. You told me in real time. I have the notes." Frank's voice steadied. "But the court doesn't know it yet. And Carter Wills is good enough to make a judge look twice before dismissing this outright. We need a counter-affidavit from your physician. We need a forensic document examiner to look at these texts. And we need it all filed before the preliminary hearing, which Wills is pushing for as early as next Wednesday." I ended the call and stood in my kitchen for a moment, with both hands flat on the counter, staring at nothing. My chest working through something that was equal parts fury and something colder and harder underneath it, the recognition that Diana had been building this move quietly in parallel this entire time. While I had been watching her left hand, her right hand had already been writing the petition. I called Carol. She answered before the second ring, and the moment she heard my voice, she said, "Raymond, what happened?" "Diana filed a competency challenge." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "She's telling a judge I'm losing my mind. Carol's sharp intake of breath cut through the line like a blade. That absolute... She stopped herself, exhaled hard. Raymond, listen to me. Eleanor anticipated this. She told me, she said, if Diana ever ran out of financial moves, she would come for your credibility. Eleanor made me keep a copy of every conversation we had about the trust during her last 3 weeks. Dates, times, topics, her exact words. She was clear and sharp and deliberate every single time, and I have all of it documented. My eyes burned without warning. I pressed the back of my hand against them and held it there. She thought of everything. She loved you more than you will ever fully understand, Carol said, and her voice cracked on the last word just slightly, just enough for me to hear the grief she was holding behind it. What do you need from me? I need you in Frank's office by noon today. Bring everything Eleanor told you to document. Every date, every conversation, every detail. I'll be there at 11:30, Carol said. And Raymond, do not let this woman make you doubt yourself for even 1 minute. Not one. I hung up. I walked through the kitchen past Eleanor's planters down the hall to the study. I sat at my desk and I opened the drawer where I kept the yellow legal pad Frank had told me to use for notes 3 weeks ago. 61 pages of dates, times, names, actions, direct quotes, everything I had documented with the precision of a man who had spent 30 years reading construction contracts and knew exactly how to build a paper record that could not be argued away. 61 pages, Eleanor's voice in my head saying, trust is also the door they walk through. I picked up the phone and called Dr. Raymond Okafor, my physician of 11 years, the man who had given me a full cognitive evaluation just 8 weeks ago as part of my annual physical, and when his receptionist answered, I said, tell Dr. Okafor I need an emergency appointment and a written evaluation. Today, if he can manage it. It's urgent. She put me on hold for 45 seconds. When she came back, she said, Dr. Okafor can see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon, Mr. Colt. I'll be there, I said. Diana had reached for the last weapon she had. The one designed to make me look small, confused, diminished to make a judge see a frail old man who did not understand what was being done to him. She had no idea what I had been doing for the past 2 months. And by Wednesday, neither would the court. The Wednesday morning of November 12th arrived the way courtroom days always do, with a particular quality of light that feels sharper than ordinary daylight, as if the world itself has decided to pay closer attention. I was up before 5, dressed by 5:30, and sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and 61 pages of handwritten notes spread in front of me when Frank Aldridge knocked on my front door at 6:45. He looked at me over the threshold, took in the pressed suit, the straight posture, the organized documents, and something in his expression loosened with relief. You ready? He asked. I have been ready for 2 months, I said. Let's go. Charleston County. Probate court sits on Broad Street, 3 blocks from where I once signed the deed on my first commercial property in 1987. I had walked past that building 100 times in my life without ever expecting to walk into it as the subject of a competency petition. The irony was not lost on me. Neither was the fury low steady and kept carefully behind my back teeth where it could not cause problems. Carter Wills was already in the hallway when Frank and I arrived at 8:15. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, silver tie, the practiced confidence of a man who charges $400 an hour and knows it. He looked at me the way people look at something they have already decided the value of. Diana stood 3 steps behind him in a charcoal dress, her posture immaculate, her face arranged into an expression of what I can only describe as performed concern, the carefully constructed look of a devoted daughter-in-law worried about a fragile old man. It was, I thought, her finest performance. It almost made me admire the craft of it. Marcus was not there. I had known he would not be. He was cooperating with Holloway's team that morning, sitting in a federal building 2 miles away, doing the hardest and most important thing he had ever done in his adult life. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, fluorescent lit, the kind of room where quiet decisions get made about people's lives without any of the drama you see on television. Judge Patricia Harmon presided, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who has seen every variation of human desperation and stopped being surprised by it years ago. Carter Wills presented his case first. He spoke for 22 minutes, and he was good. I will give him that. He laid out the affidavit from Dr. Philip Crane with smooth, measured language. He read selected text messages, 3 of them pulled out of context, stripped of the dates surrounding them, that he claimed demonstrated confusion and disorientation. He called Stephen Pratt to the stand, and Pratt described our October meeting in careful professional language that made my deliberate performance sound exactly like what Diana needed it to sound like. I watched Diana's face while Pratt testified. Her eyes were fixed on Judge Harmon with the focused intensity of a woman who had invested everything in this moment. Her jaw was set. Her hands were folded in her lap, but I noticed the knuckles had gone white. Then Frank stood up. He presented Dr. Okafor's counter-affidavit first, a full cognitive evaluation conducted on November 6th, 1 week prior, scoring Raymond J. Colt in the 94th percentile for executive function and memory recall for his age group. Dr. Okafor himself sat in the gallery available to testify if called. Frank cited his credentials without flourish, just the facts, just the numbers, just the professional opinion of a board-certified physician of 11 years. Then he presented Carol. My sister walked to the stand, with her reading glasses perched on her nose and a manila folder in both hands, and she testified for 14 minutes in the clear, direct voice of a woman who had spent 30 years as a high school principal and had never once been rattled by an audience. She laid out every conversation she had documented with Eleanor during the last 3 weeks of Eleanor's life. Dates, times, duration, the specific topics discussed about the trust amendment, Eleanor's mental clarity, her deliberate language, her expressed intentions. Every single entry had a corresponding date stamp from Carol's own calendar and phone records. Judge Harmon listened without expression, her pen moving steadily. Carter Wills objected twice. Both objections were overruled. Then Frank presented the 61 pages. He did not read them aloud. He simply placed the bound document on the evidence table and said, Your Honor, this is a contemporaneous record maintained by Mr. Colt beginning September 8th of this year, 61 pages of dated entries documenting names, times, direct quotations, and actions taken in response to the activity described in the petitioner's filing. A man experiencing the cognitive decline described in Dr. Crane's affidavit does not maintain 61 pages of organized, chronologically consistent, legally precise notes. Judge Harmon picked up the document. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she set it down and looked at Carter Wills over the top of her reading glasses. Counsel, she said, do you have anything further? Carter Wills had plenty of courtroom experience. He knew what that tone meant. No, Your Honor. Judge Harmon took exactly 4 minutes to deliberate. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat, final quality of a door closing on a locked room. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. The court finds no credible evidence of cognitive impairment, undue influence, or incapacity on the part of Raymond James Colt. The petitioner is cautioned that filing unsupported competency claims carries its own legal exposure. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. I sat very still for a moment. Frank put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once firm, warm, the wordless language of a man who has been in your corner long enough to know when words are not the right instrument. I turned and looked at Diana for the first time since we had entered the courtroom. Her face had gone the color of old paper. Every carefully arranged line of performed concern collapsed at once, replaced by something raw and cornered that she could not quite control fast enough. Her jaw worked. Her hands unfolded from her lap and gripped the edge of the gallery railing. This is not over, she said. Her voice was tight, strained, a wire pulled past its tolerance point. I looked at her steadily, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something quieter and more complete than either. Diana, I said, it was over before you filed the petition. You just did not know it yet. I picked up my documents, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of the courtroom with Frank beside me into the November sunlight on Broad Street, the same street where 38 years ago I had signed the deed on my first building, with hands that shook from excitement rather than fear. Today my hands were perfectly steady. By Thursday morning, November 13th, Charleston had turned genuinely cold, the real kind, not the polite chill the city usually offers in fall, but a hard, flat cold that came off the harbor and found every gap in your coat. I was in Frank's office by 8, and James Holloway was already there ahead of me, his jacket slung over the back of a chair, a paper cup of gas station coffee in his hand that he was drinking, with the cheerful indifference of a man who stopped caring about quality caffeine sometime in his third decade of federal work. "Good morning, Raymond." He gestured at the chair across from him. "You look like a man who slept well for the first time in 2 months. 7 hours, I said. First time since September. You earned it." He set down his coffee and opened the folder on his desk. "Now let's talk about what happened after you left that courtroom yesterday." Holloway had a source inside the federal building, not unusual for a retired agent who still had active professional relationships, and what that source had observed between 2 and 4 o'clock on the afternoon of November 12th. The same afternoon, Judge Harmon dismissed Diana's petition. Was this Diana Voss? Colt had made 11 phone calls from the parking garage adjacent to the probate court. 4 of those calls went to a number registered to a prepaid phone purchased in Colombia 3 weeks prior. 3 went to a Paris area code, a number Holloway's contact had already flagged as connected to an individual in Richard Voss's European network. And 1 call lasting 6 minutes and 40 seconds went directly to Richard Voss himself. "She's arranging something," Holloway said, tapping the call log summary with 1 finger. 11 calls in 2 hours from a parking garage tells me she is not processing a legal setback. She is executing a contingency plan. My jaw tightened. What kind of contingency? The kind that involves leaving the country. Holloway leaned back in his chair, studying me with the unhurried assessment of a man who has watched 100 people make desperate moves. "We believe Diana has been maintaining a parallel financial identity in France. Separate accounts, a property registered under her maiden name Voss rather than the hyphenated form. Richard Voss set it up for her approximately 4 years ago, around the same time Voss Capital started running structured deposits through Colt Industrial's subsidiary accounts." Frank, who had been reading from his own folder beside me, looked up sharply. "She has assets abroad that predate the marriage." "Yes, which means they are outside the jurisdiction of South Carolina family law and outside the reach of the trust protection Eleanor set up. She has an exit, gentlemen, and based on these phone calls, she is deciding whether to use it." The cold that came through Frank's office windows that morning had nothing on what settled in the center of my chest right then. Not fear, I was past fear. I had walked through the worst of it and come out the other side. What I felt was something more precise and more urgent, the understanding that the window for containing this was closing, and that if Diana reached French soil, a different and far more complicated set of problems would begin. "What about Marcus?" I asked. "Does he know she's planning to run?" Holloway's expression shifted carefully, incrementally, the way a careful man's face changes when he has information he is deciding how much of to share. "Marcus has been cooperative and forthcoming in every session we have had this week. But yesterday evening, after Diana's calls, she went home, and Marcus called our contact number at 9:47 p.m. to report that Diana had packed 2 bags and moved them to the trunk of her car." My throat tightened around something that was not quite grief and not quite anger, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. Marcus had called. My son, the man who had been carrying 18 years of terrible weight and had finally set it down on Frank's conference table, had called Holloway's line the moment he realized what his wife was doing. "He's protecting the case," Frank said quietly. "He's protecting his father," Holloway said, and he looked at me when he said it. I had to press my hand flat against my knee under the table to keep from losing my composure entirely. My throat worked. My eyes stung in a way I had not expected, and I blinked hard against it. "What do we do?" I asked when I could trust my voice again. "I've already requested a federal travel hold through the district court," Holloway said. "It should be granted within the hour. Marcus's cooperation agreement creates a nexus for the court to restrict Diana's movement as a person of interest in a federal financial crimes investigation. Once that order is in place, her passport gets flagged at every point of departure in the country. And if she tries to leave before the order clears," I asked, "then we make a different kind of call." Holloway's voice was flat matter-of-fact, the tone of a man for whom this was not a hypothetical. "But Raymond, she has not left yet. She is still in Mount Pleasant. She is still making phone calls. People who are genuinely committed to running do not spend 2 hours on the phone the day before they run. She is still trying to find a version of this where she wins." Frank set down his folder and looked across the desk at me. "Raymond there is something else. Carter Wills withdrew from Diana's representation this morning. He sent a formal letter of withdrawal to the court at 7 a.m. No explanation given, but Frank Aldridge does not need an explanation. When a $400 an hour attorney walks away from a paying client without explanation, the morning after a dismissal with prejudice, it means he has seen something in the discovery that tells him the case is about to get significantly worse for his client, and he does not want his name attached to it. I looked at Frank. Something moved through me, not triumph, not yet, but the quiet, solid recognition of a structure beginning to give way. The way a building sounds just before it comes down if you know how to listen. "She's running out of people," I said. "She's running out of everything," Frank replied. At 11:47 that morning, James Holloway received confirmation that the federal travel hold had been granted. Diana Voss Colt's passport was flagged at every departure point in the United States, effective immediately. I was sitting in Frank's conference room when the confirmation came through. Holloway read it off his phone, set the phone face down on the table, and picked up his terrible gas station coffee. "Well," he said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has just watched a very long game reach the end of its middle phase. "Now we wait for her to make her next move." I looked out the window at the gray November harbor. Somewhere in Mount Pleasant, Diana Voss Colt was standing in a house with 2 packed bags in the trunk of her car and a passport that could no longer take her anywhere. I thought about Eleanor's ceramic planters on my kitchen windowsill. I thought about 61 pages of handwritten notes. I thought about a cream-colored envelope that had been waiting 8 months for exactly this moment. And for the first time since September 8th, I let myself believe that this was going to end the way it needed to end. Friday, November 14th was the day everything built on lies finally ran out of room to stand. Holloway called at 6:50 road noise underneath his voice already moving before the sun had cleared the horizon. "Raymond, stay home today. Do not go to the bank. Do not answer numbers you don't recognize." My chest tightened. "Tell me what's happening, James." A controlled exhale. Then, "Diana tried to move assets last night. She contacted someone at First Coastal Bank, attempted a back-channel wire transfer to bypass Eleanor's dual authorization hold. The employee reported it to compliance at 11:15 p.m. We had a warrant by 4 a.m. The name arrived before I asked it. Sandra Keene. She came to us the moment Diana made the approach. Documented every word, time-stamped everything, called the security line herself, not 1 second of hesitation. Holloway's voice carried something that lived close to admiration. Diana picked the wrong person to pressure. Something unwound in my sternum. a knot I had carried so long I had stopped feeling its weight. Sandra Keene. I had met her once months ago briefly. Eleanor would have called it God watching over a stubborn old man who refused to ask for enough help. Richard Voss, I asked. FBI intercepted him at Charlotte Douglas at 5:45 this morning. One-way ticket to Geneva. A beat. He did not look surprised. Men like Richard Voss never look surprised, they just look inconvenienced. I pressed my hand over my mouth and held it there. Diana is still at the house in Mount Pleasant, Holloway continued. Before we execute the warrant, Marcus has asked to speak with her. 5 minutes. My team present. He wanted me to ask if you object. The question dropped into my chest like a stone into still water. My son, asking my permission. For 5 minutes with the woman who had held his worst secret like a leash for 3 years. I stared at Eleanor's ceramic planters on the windowsill, lopsided, patient, permanent. No objection, I said. Let him say what he needs to say. 3 hours of waiting followed. Cold coffee. Eleanor's letter in my hands, the fold lines softening from too much reading. Outside Charleston moved through an ordinary Friday morning, indifferent to everything falling apart 2 counties over. At 10:22, Marcus called. His voice was stripped bare. No management, no control, just a man breathing hard on the other end of a line. Dad, it's done. My throat closed. Are you okay? No. A sound somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't. She cried, Dad. When they read her rights, she actually cried. And I felt so tired. So unbelievably tired. My eyes burned until the window blurred. I pressed my wrist against them and breathed. That's the weight coming off. 18 years of carrying something you were never meant to carry alone. I'm sorry. His voice dropped to almost nothing. Dad, I am so sorry. For everything. For what I let her do to you. His breath fractured deep, heaving the kind of tears that come from somewhere sealed shut for too long. Marcus! My own voice was not steady, and I stopped pretending otherwise. You are my son. That does not have an asterisk on it. No conditions. Do you understand me? He tried to speak, failed, tried again. I understand, he finally managed. Good. Now tell me what you need. At 2:15 that afternoon, Henry Beaumont landed at Charleston International, flying in from Paris on 48 hours' notice carrying a hard drive with 18 years of files. He told Holloway's team at the gate, some things you hold on to because you believe the right moment will eventually come. I was not there. But Frank called the moment Henry cleared customs, and I sat at my kitchen table with cold tea in my hands and thought about a man who had carried a piece of the truth across an ocean because he believed it still mattered. Richard Voss was arraigned in federal court in Charlotte that afternoon, wire fraud conspiracy, Bank Secrecy Act violations. His attorney entered a not guilty plea with the flat efficiency of a man expecting a very long job. Diana Voss Colt was processed at the Charleston County Detention Facility at 3:40 p.m. wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, fraudulent court petition, witness intimidation. The list was not short and it was not finished. I did not watch. I sat at my kitchen table as the last daylight touched Eleanor's planters one by one, and I let it be enough that the truth had finally found the shape it needed. My phone buzzed. Marcus, Henri is here. He wants to meet you. I'd like to be there too if that's okay. I typed back 4 words tomorrow morning. My house. Then I set the phone down, looked at Eleanor's photograph on the shelf, and said out loud to no one, and to her at the same time. We got there, Elle. Saturday, November 15th came in soft and pale, the kind of morning Charleston saves for the end of hard things. Marcus knocked at 8:45 3 times evenly spaced, the same knock he had used his entire life. I opened the door before the 3rd knock faded. He stood on the porch in a gray jacket, face hollowed by a sleepless night, spent thinking rather than running. Beside him was Henri Beaumont, a trim, gray-haired Frenchman in his early 60s. with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting a long time for something to finally be set right. "Come in," I said. "Coffee's on." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had read Eleanor's letter, opened Frank's folder, and stared at 61 pages of notes in the small hours of too many mornings. The light came through the window and landed on Eleanor's planters, the same as always. Henri wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at me directly. Mr. Colt Thomas Reed was a good man. Not a perfect man, none of us are, but he was honest and he deserved better. I kept that footage because I believed someone would eventually be willing to see it. I am glad that person was you. My throat tightened. I'm glad you held on to it. I'm sorry it took this long. These things take the time they take, Henri said quietly. What matters is that they arrive. Marcus had not spoken since we sat down. I could see the effort it was costing him, sitting across from a man whose life had been altered by what Marcus had done 18 years ago in a New Jersey hotel corridor. Henri turned to face him directly. I did not come here to make this harder for you. I came because the truth needed a witness. What you do with the rest of your life is yours to decide. But I would ask you not to waste it. Marcus's jaw tightened until the muscle in his cheek jumped. His eyes filled all at once the way water rises in a vessel holding too much for too long. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I have the right to be thanked for what I did. But I hear you. After Henri left, Marcus and I sat together until the coffee went cold. He said things he had needed to say for years, and I listened the way a father listens, not to fix, not to judge, but to hold. When the words finally ran out, I reached across the table and put my hand over his. Your mother would have forgiven you before you finished the first sentence. His face crumpled. The tears came hard and deep grief and shame, and something that was beginning very tentatively to look like relief. I kept my hand over his and let him find his way through it. 3 days later, on Tuesday, November 18th, Marcus stood before a federal magistrate and entered his cooperation agreement. He called me from the courthouse steps after. It's filed, he said. Whatever comes next, I face it clean. That's all anyone can do, I said. By the end of November, Richard Voss remained in federal custody. Colt Industrial, the company Eleanor and I had built over 30 years, remained exactly where it had always been. In my name. Protected by a trust my wife had revised from a hospital bed, because she loved me more completely than I had ever understood until I held her letter in my hands. On the last Saturday of November, I stood at Eleanor's grave in the cold, bright morning, the thin winter sun on my back. You built us a door, I said. We walked through it, all of us. The wind moved through the live oaks. A cardinal landed on a branch nearby, vivid and red against the pale sky, and then was gone. I drove home. Made fresh coffee. Sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's photograph on the shelf, and her planters on the windowsill, and the hard-won quiet of a house that had been through something and was still standing. Some things survive everything. The ones worth keeping always do. I am 71 years old. And this is what I know now that I did not know on the morning of September 8th. Trust is not weakness. But trust without eyes open is an invitation. I loved my son through the worst of what he was. I loved Eleanor through the best of what she left behind. And somewhere in the middle of all that, in the courtrooms and the kitchen tables and the certified envelopes and the 61 pages of handwritten notes, I found something I had lost when she died. Not peace exactly. Something sturdier than peace. The knowledge that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, is still the only thing worth doing. I am not a religious man by habit, but I believe God puts certain people in your path at the exact moment you need them most. A lawyer who answers on the first ring, a compliance officer who picks up the phone at midnight, a Frenchman who carries the truth across an ocean for 18 years because he believes it will eventually matter. That is not coincidence. That is grace. If this family story has taught me anything, it is this: do not wait until you are standing at a grave to say what needs to be said. Do not assume the people you love are the same people you think you know. And please do not be like me. Do not mistake loyalty for blindness. These grandpa stories are never just about the old man in the chair. They are about all of us, every family, every silence, every decision made in a moment of fear that echoes for decades. This family story happened to me, but the shape of it, I have heard it in 100 different voices. My personal belief is simple: money stolen can be recovered. Time stolen cannot. Protect what matters before it needs protecting. If any part of this grandpa story stayed with you, if it made you hold someone closer or pick up a phone you have been avoiding, or simply reminded you that it is never too late to stand on honest ground, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done differently. And if you believe that real stories about real consequences deserve to be heard, subscribe and stay with us for what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A note before you continue: the stories ahead contain fictional elements constructed for the purpose of thoughtful storytelling. They are built to illuminate, not to sensationalize. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for right now, no hard feelings. Step away, find what serves you, and come back when you are ready. But if you are staying, welcome. The next chapter begins soon.